Season 1916-17 opened with Celtic firm favourites for the title again, and they would indeed win it by 10 points at the season's end. But this was the season when the war finally began to catch up with them. The effects of the conflict on Celtic and Scottish football are trivial in comparison to the horrors and destruction inflicted on the peoples of Europe. By March 1916, the French army was close to collapse as the Battle of Verdun raged, the German Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, infamously saying the objective was to bleed France white. In this aim at least they were succeeding. A key reason for the British offensive on the Somme in July 1916 was to relieve the pressure on the French at Verdun and prevent a German breakthrough, which potentially could win them the war. Conscription had been extended to married men in May 1916, and by the end of the year, Tom McGregor, John McMaster and Peter Johnstone had been conscripted and would play football only sporadically. By the beginning of 1918, Andy McAtee and Joe Dodds had been called up as well. The season got underway in Paisley on the 19th of August 1916 with a Celtic debut for Willie McStay, who had signed for the club in 1912 but had spent the past 2 seasons on loan to Ayr United. The 23-year-old McStay would soon be nicknamed the Tank, although this must have been only after the introduction of the first tanks on the Western Front late in 1916, or maybe after their first effective use at the Battle of Cambrai in 1917. The Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 21st of August gave a hint of how far football was now being affected by the war. In most of the games, there were indications that the players were handicapped by lack of training and by unfamiliarity with each other's intentions. This was not obvious in the case of the champions, who have been fortunate enough so far to retain most of their successful performers. The report went on to state, "There is just a possibility that in time McMenemy, Shaw and McMaster will be commandeered by the military authorities." Celtic set the tone for the season with a 5-1 win over St Mirren, Patsy Gallacher scoring 4 of the goals, in spite of which the Daily Record of the 21st of August 1916 reported, "Neither McMenemy nor Gallacher were anything like their true selves." For most of the first half, Celtic toiled to make the breakthrough, but shortly after the restart, St Mirren had to reshuffle their defence because of an injury to one of their fullbacks, and Waverley in the Daily Record reported, "Then the ubiquitous and brainy Patsy came into the limelight. In 2 minutes, he had put the finishing touch to a bombarding movement in which McAtee, Browning, the Timber and Browning again figured prominently. Within the quarter, he drove home another of the clever little left-winger's centres. Then, by way of a change, from a simple-looking cross, Clark netted for St Mirren. The game had still 20 minutes to go, but Patsy wasn't done. He obliged with a glorious 4th goal, his very own. And to crown all, O'Kane got away by himself and brought out the handful." Celtic would not lose a match until the final league game of the season, and didn't even drop a point until the 14th of October in a 1-1 draw at Brockville. But it was becoming ever more difficult to justify the continuation of football, and not just due to the fact that fit young men were playing the game. After a 4-0 win over Motherwell at Fir Park on the 16th of September, an opinion piece by a Captain Kidd in the Motherwell Times of the 22nd of September 1916 complained about the amount of military-aged men in the crowd. "I'll warrant that many an onlooker felt, as I did, the serious conviction that the proportion of strapping young fellows which these crowds contained was indeed a strange thing at this time. Why, ignoring for the moment the precise military requirements as to age, etc., I would say that with only an occasional exception, that crowd could quite well be conceived as arming itself with rifles and bayonets and going bodily into the most strenuous of military action and coming out of it with credit. Sturdy youths sporting about at home while men with families run the deadly gauntlet of the trenches is an aspect of the question that can never be contemplated with satisfaction." Captain Kidd also printed an extract from a letter sent in by an Irishman, which alludes to a certain anti-Irish sentiment in regards to enlistment. "Sir, I was just having a look at the Motherwell Times this week and saw where a dancing hall had got a visit from the police. and they are still talking about the Irishmen. If you had been at the Motherwell v Dundee football match, as I was, you would have seen from 7,000 to 8,000 at it, and the majority of them Scotchmen. You people never think on that. You should think about your own first, and then talk about us. I don't think our town has done enough in regards in giving men to the army, for there is nearly double the amount left as what is away. I am an Irishman, or boy, whatever you like to call me, but I have a heart that is not afraid to go to any place I am sent. When an Irishman does fight, he can do it. There is no beating about the bush with us. When we go to fight, we have hearts like lions. I was only 17 when I listed, and am proud of the regiment I am in, and it is the gallant Highland Light Infantry. E.G. By this time, John McMaster and Peter Johnstone had been called up to the army, although both were available on the 23rd of September 1916 for the Glasgow Cup Semi-Final against Rangers at Celtic Park, listed in the team line-ups in the Daily Record of the 25th of September as Private McMaster and Private Johnstone. Attendances may have been significantly down during the war, but there were still 50,000 in the ground. It was a hard-fought match until the 74th minute, when Celtic broke the deadlock and added 2 more in the final 15 minutes. But up till then, there was an edge to the game that more than once threatened to boil over. Waverley wrote in the Daily Record, "Knockout football is of such rare occurrence nowadays that when it does come along, the players are even more excited than they used to be. As a consequence, the play suffers, and a possible extra time and counting corner kicks doesn't help matters." There's more evidence from this match that Patsy Gallacher was no shrinking violet on the field. The Sunday Post of the 24th of September 1916 reporting, "Then we had a scene. The ball came along to Logan, who got it and moved on. Gallacher rushed in. Logan got the ball away, but the Celt seemed to have hit the Ranger with his foot. Anyway, Logan wheeled round and he and Gallacher clashed, the big Ranger taking the little Celt by the neck and shaking him. The Celtic supporters yelled their disapproval. The referee arrived and stopped what might have ended in serious trouble. Logan was certainly marked, and he took care to show the exact spot on which Gallacher had nailed him." Shortly after, Gallacher ran clean through the Rangers' defence but was hauled down from behind by Logan, with only a free kick to show for his pains. The Sunday Post reported, "On retiring at the interval, Logan came in for a very warm reception from Celtic enthusiasts." Shortly before Celtic's opener, Private Johnstone was set to take the law into his own hands. The Sunday Post recording, "Then we had another disagreeable view. There was Peter Johnstone challenging Lawson to fight and setting himself in his best attitude for an opening. But the Ranger wisely held off, and the referee rushed in and put an end to the scene by taking the players aside and giving them a lecture. What actually was the cause of the incident was not very clear." While Celtic were clearly the better team, and Rangers goalkeeper Locke much the busier of the two custodians, it was beginning to look as though Celtic were depending on their greater number of corners to take them through, until a late goal burst in the final quarter of the match. Waverley reported, "Celtic were surely wearing down the opposition, but still nothing doing. They held the advantage in corners, but, as I have already indicated, only 16 minutes remained for play when the opening goal came along. It was cleverly taken by Browning, who, suspiciously offside, seemed to get in and get under Manderson ere letting go his shot, which gave Locke not the ghost of a chance. 6 or 7 minutes later, Big Boy O'Kane bored his way through the now cracked-up Ibrox defence to roll the second one home. And just as we were preparing to follow suit, Peter Johnstone got his head to a lovely cross of McAtee's." The 3-0 win sent Celtic through to yet another Glasgow Cup final, and it was a convincing win in the end, but it had been a bad-tempered game to say the least, and the Sunday Post concluded their report on the 24th of September 1916. "The Celtic van has often been seen to better advantage, but it was smart enough to win. Gallacher was the particular shining light, but he should refrain from biffing needlessly into big men. He simply asked for trouble. McAtee and McMenemy did excellent work on the right." While Privates McMaster and Johnston would appear more sporadically as the season progressed, none of the players were free of commitments to the war effort, and all clubs were at times finding it difficult to field their best sides on a weekly basis. Patsy Gallacher was no different, but he seems to have been fully committed to his football nevertheless, and soon found himself in bother with the authorities for what was referred to as bad timekeeping by the newspapers. A report appeared in the Daily Record of Wednesday the 22nd of November 1916 on the session of the Glasgow Munitions Court which dealt with the Gallacher case. At the Glasgow Munitions Tribunal, in the county buildings yesterday, Sheriff Fife presiding, a Clyde shipbuilding firm complained against Patrick Gallacher, the well-known Celtic football player, who was employed by them as a carpenter for bad timekeeping. It was averred that he had been off work several periods between September 27th and October 24th. The respondent did not appear, but he sent in a letter stating that he met with a knee injury on Saturday, and the wound having festered, he was unable to continue at work. He required rest in order to recover from the injury. A foreman stated that he had no report as to the respondent having met with an injury, and no doctor's certificate had been sent. The injury certainly did not occur in the shipyard. Gallacher was the well-known Celtic football player, and it was quite likely that he might have got his knee injured at a match. The respondent got numerous warnings to keep better time. Replying to the firm's representative, the witness said that Gallacher had been off every Saturday during the period libelled when he played for Celtic 3 times at Parkhead and once at Falkirk. He was absent from work previous to and after several of those days. Sheriff Fife remarked that that was not very consistent with having a bad knee. He could not play football if his statement was correct. The firm's representative asked his lordship to look upon the case as a serious one. As the firm were engaged on important admiralty work, it was necessary that they should have as much full time as possible out of their employees. Gallacher was a fit man, and while he could not attend to his work, was able to play football. He was at his work on Monday. His lordship said that Gallacher had availed himself of what was his right of sending in a written statement to the tribunal instead of attending personally. Had he been present, he would have been interrogated as to the inconsistency of his statement with that of the evidence led. It would appear that he preferred the amusement of football to the interest of his country in attending to his work. The case was one for the infliction of the maximum penalty, £3, payable in 6 instalments. Following the tribunal's decision, Gallacher was suspended for 6 weeks by the Scottish League on the 22nd of December, and Celtic were fined £25 for fielding him against Aberdeen on the 25th of November, after the decision had been made known. Without their talisman, Celtic scored only 3 goals in January 1917, although they conceded only 1, recording 0-0 draws against Rangers, Clyde and 3rd Lanark, a 1-1 draw with Dumbarton, and 1-0 wins over Motherwell and Hearts. In Gallacher's return on the 3rd of February 1917, the forward line made a spectacular return to form, the mighty Atom scoring twice in a 5-0 win over Raith Rovers at Celtic Park. The Sunday Post of the 4th of February 1917 reported, Patsy Gallacher reappeared in the Celtic team yesterday after 6 weeks suspension. Between 10,000 and 20,000 spectators gave him a rousing reception when he trotted out. His comeback saw the champions win by the biggest score at Parkhead since Ayr United were beaten 5-0 on December the 9th. Gallacher was in fine fettle, was the most prominent man on the Celtic side, and the best forward on the field. David Potter writes of Gallacher's return, he scored twice himself and fed Jimmy McCall and Andy McAtee for the other 3. His first goal was a brilliant individual one where he picked up a loose ball in the middle of the Raith Rovers half, then waltzed past 4 defenders and then hammered home an unstoppable shot. It was small wonder that the most talked about person in the trenches whenever Scots soldiers met was not the Kaiser, nor Lloyd George, nor George V. It was Patsy Gallacher. Following Gallacher's return, Celtic failed to win only 2 matches until after they sealed the title. The second of these, a match at Pittodrie on the 24th of March, which Gallacher could not attend due to his work commitments at John Brown's. The club's fourth title in a row, their 14th overall, was clinched in a 3-1 win over Dumbarton at Boghead on the 7th of April 1917. They lost their long, proud, unbeaten record in the final league match of the season, going down 2-0 to Kilmarnock at Celtic Park on the 21st of April 1917, after a record run of 62 league matches unbeaten. They finished the season 10 points ahead of Morton in second place, who had pipped Rangers to the runners-up spot by 1 point. The season was rounded off by yet another Glasgow Merchants Charities Cup success, beating Rangers 2-0 in the semi-final and Queen's Park in the final on the 19th of May 1917. Celtic's success thus far during the war had been uninterrupted, but sometime between the Charity Cup semi-final and final, the reality of war would hit home hard. For 6 weeks in April and May, the British Army launched an offensive on the German lines near the French city of Arras. By the third week in May, rumours were beginning to circulate that Peter Johnstone, who, unbeknownst to all present, played his final match for Celtic in the Glasgow Cup Final on the 7th of October 1916, had been killed in the fighting. The news was confirmed on the 5th of June 1917, when that day's Dundee Evening Telegraph reported, "Information has just been received that Private Peter Johnstone, Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, has been killed in action. He was a well-known footballer and had played for Celtic for a number of years, generally at half-back. He belonged to Glencraig, Lochelie, where his widow resides." The Daily Record the following morning printed a photo of Johnstone wearing his uniform and regimental cap with the short caption, "It transpires now that the story of the death in action of Peter Johnstone, the Celtic half-back, which has been going round Glasgow for a fortnight or more, is only too true. Peter belonged to Glencraig, where his widow and family reside." Man in the Know paid tribute to Johnstone in the Glasgow Observer of the 9th of June 1917. A fortnight ago, a rumour went round that Peter Johnstone had been killed in action in France. Inquiries reached us from all parts, but nowhere could I get anything official or authentic, and so the rumour came to be regarded as mere gossip. Like a bombshell came the tidings on Tuesday that poor Peter had really gone. Killed in action, the official message said. So Johnstone, like his namesakes Summers and Dowds, has joined the majority. The three Celtic Peters had this feature in common. They were the best of good fellows, immensely popular because of their extremely amiable and cheery dispositions. Peter Johnstone came to Parkhead from Glencraig Celtic, in which junior club he nourished the ambition of one day becoming a member of the great Glasgow team, of which he was a fiercely enthusiastic admirer. "I would pay to get playing for them," he is reported to have said, and in all his games as a Celt, he lived up to that utterance. Beginning as an inside left forward, he showed boundless cleverness and pluck, but a lack of repose. At centre-half, his eager, restless keenness found proper vent, and he creditably filled the shoes of Willie Loney. Like most of his Celtic comrades, he was fond of golf, and many a game we had together, playing golf but talking football. I last saw Peter at the league game, Celtic v Third Lanark at Cathkin, which ended in a draw. He turned up at the pavilion near the finish, looking every inch a soldier in his Argyll kilt. His death leaves a big blank at Celtic Park, and he will be mourned by every Celtic supporter. By the beginning of season 1917-18, the last full season at war, Joe Dodds would be called up and the military authorities would soon come calling for Willie McStay and Andy McAtee as well. The wartime conditions continued to cause difficulties for all clubs, and possibly one of the greatest was the time and cost of travelling for matches, with the demands of the war effort having priority on rail stock, and the Glasgow clubs in particular were finding it increasingly inconvenient to travel to the north east. On the 6th of June 1917, the league decided to reduce the top flight from 20 to 18 clubs and asked Aberdeen, Dundee and Raith Rovers to drop out until the war was over. The Dundee Courier reported on the 7th of June 1917, Dundee Football Club will not take part in Scottish League football next season. At last night's meeting of the league held in Glasgow, last year's committee's recommendation that Aberdeen, Raith Rovers and Dundee be asked not to take part in the competition next season came up for consideration. There was a great deal of discussion, during which several suggestions were made. Ultimately, the three clubs concerned agreed not to take part in next season's competition on consideration that they be compensated by their on-cost charges on a basis of 3 years. It was resolved that the ordinary competition between the 20 clubs at present forming the league be suspended, and in lieu thereof that the competition be carried out by the 17 remaining, with the addition of a club in the second division. It was further resolved that Clydebank be offered the remaining place. It was also agreed that the players of the three northeastern clubs would be allowed to turn out for any of the other clubs still involved, and Man in the Know speculated that Rangers would sign up several of them in a determined bid to win the league for the first time in 5 years. He wrote on the 16th of June 1917, Mention of Dixon and McDermott reminds me that Rangers mean to do all in their power to prevent the Celts sweeping the boards next season. Now that Dundee, Aberdeen and Raith Rovers are out of First League football for a year at least, the best of the players will be called up by other clubs. We had an indication of the part that Ibrox will play in the spoiling form by the presence of the Raith Rovers right wing, Archibald and Lindsay, in the Rangers charity tie team against Celtic. Dixon and McDermott's appearance on Saturday and well-founded rumours that McIntosh, Dundee and other East Coast stars will scintillate, more or less, at Ibrox in the near future. This means more prospecting for Celtic, so don't be surprised if the back greens and cinder heaps of the city be combed out and more Browns and McLeans unearthed. If it comes to the worst, the Celts may actually have to take a look round the junior clubs and pick up another McCall, McMenemy, Dodds or Gallacher. Meantime, just sufficient youngsters are on Mr Maley's list to enable us to keep a calm sow and await the all-Scottish combination likely to be in Rangers' pay next season. As it turned out, it was more than an all-Scottish combination in Rangers' pay in season 1917-18. They did indeed hoover up talent from the three clubs asked to step down, but also drew reinforcements from England as well, where league football had been suspended since 1915. The season started well enough, with 4 league wins in the first 4 matches, and a win over Queen's Park in the Glasgow Cup. But then came a dispiriting loss to the newly reinforced Rangers in the semi-final on the 22nd of September 1917. The Glasgow Herald of the 24th of September 1917 noted, The Celtic team, like some of the warring nations, seem to have become war-weary, anxious for peace, indifferent to terms. For the last 4 years, they have waged incessant warfare against their neighbours and achieved marvellous successes considering their comparatively limited resources. 4 consecutive league championships, 6 successive Charity Cup triumphs were gained by practically the same team that last won the Scottish Cup, and which on Saturday made a vain effort to retain the Glasgow Cup for a third term with forces impaired by accidents and the call of country. Their wonderful sequence was bound to end sooner or later, for football teams, like nations in arms, must give way in their turn. Other clubs have given freely of their players to the great cause. Queen's Park, Heart of Midlothian, Clyde, Rangers. Every league club in fact answered the call, but only one made extraordinary efforts to fill the vacancies, and the Celts may be excused for giving way before an 11, the majority of which were but recently in the ranks of Queen's Park, Dundee, Sheffield Wednesday, Oldham United and other noted clubs. Despite this loss, form remained consistent, and it was the 13th of October 1917 before they lost in the league, 3-1 at home to Kilmarnock, who had ended Celtic's long unbeaten run at the end of the previous season. In the first league match against Rangers, they were very much second favourites at Ibrox on the 20th of October 1917, but left with a 2-1 win after a bad-tempered game before a 40,000 crowd that several times threatened to get out of control. The Sunday Post of the 21st of October 1917 reported, "The shady work indulged in was all against the good name of the game. Thus we had Manderson with his fists up to McCall in retaliation. Gordon too lost his rag and shaped accordingly, and Bowie fell foul of Patsy and put up his dukes. These exhibitions, though perhaps natural, were quite unseemly." Rangers went in front after 15 minutes, but Celtic equalised through Jimmy McCall 4 minutes later, and with Privates McGregor and McMaster back in the ranks and gradually finding their feet, they took control, Waverley reporting in the Daily Record of the 22nd of October 1917. "With the scoring of this point, the Celts picked up a game which was absent in the first quarter of an hour, and instead of finishing the half the beaten company they looked like for a bit, they, as I have already indicated, came within an ace of crossing over a goal ahead. McMaster and McGregor, who had opened rather gingerly, became something like their real selves, and this improvement had its effect on both sets of forwards. The Ibrox attack was less often in the picture than formerly. The Celtic quintet became a genuine source of trouble to Manderson and Blair." In the second half, Andy McAtee, who had earlier cracked a shot off the crossbar, scored a late winner, taking advantage of a blunder in the Rangers' defence to shoot home from 5 yards. By the time they met Rangers again, on the 1st of January 1918, a 0-0 draw saw Celtic head the table by 2 points from their Ibrox rivals. But more player troubles was on the horizon, with Patsy's right-wing partner, Andy McAtee, being targeted by the military authorities for conscription. Cumbernauld-born McAtee had taken up a job as a miner on the outbreak of war in 1914, but as the Western Front continued to swallow up men on an industrial scale, the government began to apply the rules on exemptions from military service far more strictly, and men who had not been miners in July 1914 found themselves called up. The news broke at the beginning of September that McAtee was to be conscripted. The Sunday Post reported on the 2nd of September 1917. "At a sitting of the Miners' Tribunal of Central Scotland on Saturday, a number of interesting and important cases were dealt with. These included the case of Andrew McAtee, the well-known Glasgow Celtic football player, against whose exemption as a miner the military authorities appealed. Mr Paul McKenna of the Lanarkshire Miners' Union stated that McAtee had from his boyhood been a worker in the mines, which he left in 1912 on becoming a professional football player, but he returned to work in the mines again after the war broke out. In reply to Mr Walker, His Majesty's Inspector of Mines who presided, it was stated that McAtee's father had been a miner and McAtee had always followed the same occupation. McAtee said he worked in the mines during the football close season. The chairman: How much would that be? Mr McKenna: 6 months of the year. The chairman: Get away! I know more about football than you. I tell you that there is about 3 months of a close season, and out of that 3 months you would be training for 1 month. Does your club allow you to work previous to the season commencing again? The usual thing is 1 month's training before the reopening. Did they allow you to work that month? McAtee: Yes. The chairman: You are lucky. They treated you well. McAtee was refused exemption. McAtee appealed against the decision of the tribunal, but was only successful in winning a stay of execution. The Kirkintilloch Gazette reported on the 26th of October 1917. Andrew McAtee, 29, miner, Croy, the well-known Glasgow Celtic footballer, in his appeal stated that he was a miner, married, and his wife's health was precarious, and he was doing work of national importance. An agent appeared with McAtee and submitted a medical certificate as to his wife's health. His client was a general serviceman, and he could not possibly ask for conditional exemption, but he would like some time. Sheriff McDermott: He is protected in the mine. Agent: He has been combed out of the mines, otherwise I would not have been here. Chairman: We give temporary exemption till 15th of January. Andy McAtee was enlisted into the army at the end of January, and on the 2nd of February 1918, his place in the side was taken by 27-year-old Frank Kelly, the son of James Kelly, who had previously played for Motherwell and was home on leave from the army. He would play only a handful of matches for Celtic and was tragically killed in an accident in France while still serving with the army in May 1919. Had he lived, he might well have become a Celtic director and even chairman, rather than his younger brother Robert. Like every other new recruit, Andy McAtee faced months of basic training before being sent to the front, so he was still available to play most Saturdays until the end of the season. But 3 draws in January against St Mirren, Falkirk and Airdrieonians saw Rangers draw level on points by the end of the month. The Airdrie match was a rollercoaster affair that saw Celtic take the lead, trail 2-1, and then after going 3-2 ahead, threw it away late on to draw 3-3, with Patsy again in the wars. The Sunday Post reported on the 27th of January 1918, "When a goal down, some of the Celts played rather shadily. Gallacher was the best forward afield. He was a box full of tricks. Twice he was threatened, Donaldson squaring up to him in the first half and Watson in the second. Patsy looked aggrieved, but he appeared to be at fault in each instance." Rangers drew level with a 2-0 win at Ayr United, and man in the know in the Glasgow Observer the following Saturday made some not-so-subtle hints of favours being called in by the Ibrox club in a desperate attempt to prevent Celtic winning a 5th title in a row. As Ayr United had drawn at Ibrox some time ago, there was every chance of their improving upon that result in the replay at Somerset Park. So the Ibrox officials thought, for the fiery cross went round and Brown and Gordon were summoned from their war stations. I hope this pair will have many years of football before them. Still, one cannot help wondering how they, and thousands like them, are on the safe side of the North Sea when thrice wounded soldiers have to go back and risk being knocked out for good. Of course these are questions for the higher officials, but humble people cannot help asking them. There is luck in war as in football, and possibly that explains how some young fellows have found themselves in the trenches after a few weeks' training, and others at their war stations after 2 years. In the circumstances, I imagine it would be a wise policy for all clubs to give a game to their soldier players only when on ordinary leave, as we have seen in the cases of Brownlee, Mercer, Speedy, McMaster and others. To win the league championship is a mighty poor affair compared with winning the war, but, unfortunately, we don't all seem to place the same value on what used to be an honour. When directors attach so much importance to winning a game, one cannot blame players for taking an equally serious view. There was some bloodletting at Tynecastle on Saturday, 1 or 2 reports make out. Some bad blood in evidence for certain, as some of the Hearts and Hamilton Accies players used their fists to each other instead of applying their boots to the ball. Fighting on the football field in peacetime is bad enough, in all conscience, but at the present time becomes a menace to the game. It lets the authorities know where they can lay hands on quite a number of fellows who might be handy with bomb or rifle, and that is something worth knowing in these days of manpower schemes. A few more fights among civilian players, a little more weekending by soldier players might wind the game up for the duration. I wonder if certain clubs and players have ever thought of that. Possibly not. They may have been too busy devising ways and means of keeping Celtic out of another championship. Celtic rallied again, and a 100% record in February saw them lead the table by a single point after a 2-0 win over Morton at Celtic Park on the 23rd of February and a goalless draw at Motherwell for Rangers. The Daily Record reported on the 25th of February 1918 that the Celts had Gunnar McAtee out again. But it was Patsy Gallacher who inspired them to the win with 2 goals, the first said to be reminiscent of his legendary somersault goal in the 1925 Scottish Cup Final. The Sunday Post reported on the 24th of February, "The first was midway through the first period, just when McIntyre left the field to get his injury attended to. Gallacher was after the ball, dashing between the backs. Bradford rushed out. Both reached the ball at the same time. There was a biff. Bradford went down. Patsy staggered and fell, but, in falling, contrived to give the ball a clip, which sent it bumming into the net. It was a goal reminiscent of Jamie Quinn, a goal which sends a thrill through a crowd. He scored the second, close on the interval." After a 0-0 draw with Partick Thistle on the 9th of March, The pivotal moment of the campaign came against 3rd Lanark at Celtic Park on the 23rd of March. Celtic went down to a shock 3-1 defeat to 3rd Lanark, all 3 of their goals being scored by ex-Celt Davy McLean, who would play against Celtic in the 1925 Scottish Cup Final for Dundee. McLean had broken into the Celtic team as a 16-year-old over a decade before, but had the most difficult job in football, being in competition with Jimmy Quinn for the centre-forward berth. He had left for Preston North End in 1909, then moved on to Sheffield Wednesday in 1911, and before the war had twice been the top scorer in the English First Division. He would play for Rangers on loan for a single season in 1918-19 before returning to Sheffield. He signed for Dundee in 1922. McLean's shooting proved the difference between the teams, with Celtic hampered by an injury to Jimmy McCall, who limped up and down the left wing for most of the match, and despite what the Daily Record of the 25th of March 1918 described as the almost superhuman efforts of Patsy Gallacher to turn things around. After McLean opened the scoring, Patsy equalised with a stunning solo effort, described by the Sunday Post of the 24th of March 1918. Then we had Celtic's equaliser. Gallacher provided it, a dandy. He got hold about 20 yards out and waded in wizard-like. Rob advanced. Gallacher twisted and turned like an eel. Rob was nonplussed and the Celt just tapped the ball over the line. It was one of the best goals ever scored at Celtic Park. It was greeted with tremendous cheering which was resumed when the game recommenced. As Celtic went down to a 3-1 defeat, a burning sense of injustice was reflected in the Glasgow Observer by a columnist going by the name of Onlooker, who compared acts of foul play at Celtic Park and at Broomfield, where Rangers were beating Airdrieonians. Against 3rd Lanark on Saturday, Gallacher twice and McAtee once were clean through the red defence with the goal absolutely at their mercy, when, with callous, brazen effrontery and in the coolest and foulest manner, each was brought down from behind. Free kicks were given and warnings uttered, but neither the place kicks nor the shaken finger could compensate the Celts for the goals denied them by flagrant breaches of football law and of the ordinary canons of fair play. Thus the Celts were being deprived of points at Parkhead, while their rivals at Airdrie were bagging the spoils in this fashion. I quote the Daily Record. But for a certain little happening, I am convinced that an Airdrie score would have come along midway through the second half, just 5 minutes before Bernard obligingly dropped the ball for young Hart to win the match. Jamie Reid was going on to beat Locke when McQueen saved the situation by pulling the feet from the flying centre. It wasn't cricket, but it paid. There you are. In boxing, the low hit brings disqualification. In league football, the timely trip decides the championship. As Celtic stumbled, more importantly, the war was reaching a critical juncture. In April 1917, the USA declared war on Germany, but it would be 12 months before the first American troops set foot in Europe. In November 1917, the second revolution of the year in Russia brought the Bolsheviks to power, and almost their first act was to withdraw from the war, freeing up around 1 million German troops on the Eastern Front for one last desperate attempt to win the war on the Western Front before the Americans arrived. The Glasgow Observer that week bewailed the Rangers' approach, which had seen them assemble a large squad of players from both England and the 3 northeastern clubs who had withdrawn from the league, while the rest of the First Division teams struggled to find 11 players most weeks, and all while the war hung in the balance and the Allied lines were being rolled back by up to 40 miles by Ludendorff's spring offensive. On the 27th of April 1918, Man in the Know wrote, "So now you know what to expect. A clean sweep, Ibrox at the top, Celtic and the others nowhere." This challenge to the other clubs in the league is not what one would term a brave action. You would not think much of a sound, hearty young chap who strolled into the Erskine grounds and challenged the poor limbless fellows to race or wrestle him. Well, that is what Ibrox proposes. Every club has lost a limb within the last 4 years. Celtic, their grand half-back line. Hearts, 4 of their 5 forwards, not to mention Mercer, Nellies, Crossan, Briggs and many more. Clyde have had to look out a new team. Queen's Park have quite a battalion at the front. Falkirk, Ayr United, 3rd Lanark and the others have lost goalkeepers or goal-getters. All of them have carried on with junior players and such senior players as could not find places at Ibrox. Jackson is a case in point. And the prospect of again overcoming these shadowy teams is eagerly anticipated by officials and followers of the Dundee, Oldham Athletic, Raith Rovers, Sheffield Wednesday collection of celebrities. The situation does not appeal to Celtic, a club glutted with honours won in fair fight, very often against great odds, and we can well afford to see the Ibrox constellation make new records at the expense of crippled, I might say limbless opponents. It is a poor heart that never rejoices, and many a time we have sent a Rangers team and its following home with long faces and heavy hearts. It wasn't quite a clean sweep, as Rangers were beaten by Partick Thistle in the semi-finals of the Glasgow Merchants Charities Cup, and the Firhill side were beaten by Celtic in the final at Hampden on the 25th of May 1918. Frank Kelly turned out for Celtic in this match, ensuring he would gain a winner's medal in his brief Celtic career, as goals from Patsy Gallacher and Johnny Browning secured the cup for a record 7th successive year. As the last full football season of the war ended, a letter airing some age-old complaints and hinting at a renewed determination in Celtic circles was published in the Glasgow Observer. Sir, Celtic, by reason of their great victory over Partick Thistle in the final tie of the Charity Cup, have created a new record by winning this handsome trophy for the 7th year in succession, beating their own previous record of 6 successive wins. Truly a great performance, but hardly noticed by the press. The Celts have, indeed, an uphill fight all the time. What with the anti-Celtic crowds, referees and press reporters, the path of the Celts in Scottish football is anything but a rosy one. The Hampden Standites fairly surpassed themselves on Saturday last. They were anti-Celtic to a man. I have heard about the German hymn of hate, but it pales into insignificance when compared with the Hampden Park habitués' howl of hate when the Celts walked off with the cup. As for some of the officials, well, the least said about them the better. Now, with all these barbed wire entanglements, it is a wonder Celtic are still found playing in Scottish football, let alone being in the very front rank of the game. But then again, when a club with such past great players as Daniel Doyle and Sandy McMahon, and such shining lights as compose the present-day team, the imperturbable McNair, the fearless and dashing Joe Dodds, brainy Jim McMenemy, and the peerless Patsy Gallacher, there is nothing to wonder at. Indeed, if the lads in green and white continue as they are doing at present, I can picture the clubs of the future emerging from the Celtic pavilion armed with revolvers in the endeavour to put the Celts out of action. Long may the boys at Parkhead go on in their own sweet way, scoring victory after victory, bringing confusion into camps of their antagonists and joy to the hearts of their faithful supporters. I am, etc., green and white. Jimmy McGrory showed he was back in form in the week before the 4th round tie against St Mirren, scoring doubles in 4-0 wins away to Hamilton on the 24th of February and at home to Dundee on the 28th. The impressive win over Dundee was achieved without Patsy Gallacher, on international duty with Ireland against Willie McStay's Scotland in Belfast, And as he approached his 34th birthday, it appears there were questioning voices being raised as to just how far Celtic really were dependent on their talismanic inside forward. Man in the Know, in previewing the 4th round encounter at Love Street on the day of the match, wrote, "Saturday's happenings have revived the controversy, it is not new, as to Gallacher's real worth to the Celtic team. Surely those who were at Cathkin cannot be in two minds about the matter. Every man in our 11 had his share in that brilliant victory, but it must be admitted that it was Gallacher's wizard work which first shook and finally wrecked the Warriors' morale. On the other hand, the St Mirren backs have long had a name for robustious tackling, and it is possible that Fleming's breezy, fearless dashes might be just as effective at Love Street as Patsy's elusive manoeuvres. Certainly the Celtic teamwork against Dundee was the best they have shown this season." The Celtic partisan was also quick to point to the form of several other players in the side that defeated Dundee. "While our forwards, all 5 of them, sparkled, it must be said that our halfbacks also rose to the occasion and gave a very good reproduction of the young loony hay stuff which used to delight us all. McFarlane was captain for the day and honoured the post by giving a brilliant display. James McStay was even nippier than usual, and as for Wilson, well, words fail to describe adequately the amalgam of dourness, daring and cleverness which infested his work with the hallmark of real genius." Despite Celtic's high-scoring performances in the week, Waverley in the Daily Record of the 7th of March 1925 not only forecast a draw in Paisley, but suggested Celtic would be perfectly happy with it. "It's rather a pity, from the financial viewpoint, that Glasgow, the city of football, has been drawn blank in the 4th round. But we may have the pleasure yet of seeing a couple of ties decided within hearing of St Mungo's bells in midweek. Both members of the old firm go into the country this afternoon, and, just as like as not, both will return without having won or lost. With such a result, neither St Mirren nor Kilmarnock would cavil much, or at all, and with such a result, I am certain Celtic would be delighted. Indeed, I make bold to say that a draw at Paisley is the best that could happen to them." Man in the Know, on the other hand, was more confident of Celtic's success. "Love Street doesn't always connote love, I'm sorry to say. I trust the refereeing will be satisfactorily firm, and that Gallacher and McLean will get reasonable protection. It is my considered opinion that a repeat of their form against 3rd Lanark and Dundee will suffice to take the Celts into the semi-final." Paisley experienced 4 seasons in one day on the 7th of March 1925, Waverley writing in his Daily Record match report, "We had samples of several kinds of weather, a blizzard 20 minutes before the start, another of the same a quarter of an hour before the interval, and intermittent spells of watery sunshine. The sleet played the mischief with the footing. It was slithery." With the cup presenting Celtic's last chance for silverware, fans poured into Paisley in huge numbers. Man in the Know reported in the Glasgow Observer of the 14th of March 1925. "Not only did Clydeside pour its thousands into the quaint old town, but from every part of Lanarkshire, crowds of Celtic enthusiasts flocked to witness the great game. The attendance bordered on 50,000, easily a record for St Mirren's enlarged and very spacious enclosure. Space will not permit more than the briefest reference to the extraordinary scenes witnessed at Paisley Cross, in High Street, Moss Street, Old Snedden, and the other arteries leading to Love Street grounds. Brake clubs in full panoply tried to thread a passage through the densely packed throng, and youths in strange vesture of green and white sang their battle hymns, while the douce folk of Threadopolis looked on agape. Inside the ground, one saw green streamers everywhere, while at intervals green balloons were unloosed to the vagaries of the western blast. A biting hailstorm heralded the appearance of the teams and quite failed to quench the ardour of the fans. The Saints got a cordial reception, but when Willie McStay led the Celts afield, the mighty roar of greeting might have been heard at Parkhead Cross." In those days before ground safety became a thing, the Sunday Post reported there were 46,000 spectators present as Celtic lined up Shevlin, W. McStay, Hilly, Wilson, J. McStay, McFarlane, Connolly, Gallacher, McGrory, Thompson, McLean. The weather probably ruined any prospect of an exciting cup tie, and the level of excitement it generated for the crowd was just as a scoreless draw suggests. The Sunday post-match report on the 8th of March 1925 was appropriately headlined, "Dour Struggle Between Saints and Celtic." Willie McStay won the toss, and Celtic started with the strong wind at their backs, dominating the first half but running up against a stubborn St Mirren defence who gave little away, Waverley writing, "It was hard enough fought out in all conscience, but the thrills I looked for were non-existent. No, there wasn't the enthralling cup tie touch about the match that I expected." Chances were made in the first half, but not taken, with Adam McLean, normally a clinical finisher, failing to convert on more than one occasion. Captain Bob in the Sunday Post reporting, "Had Adam McLean been in anything like his usual form, Celtic would have opened the second half with a 2-goal lead. A commanding position surely for a team of Celtic's calibre." During the interval, St Mirren changed from their usual black and white stripes into royal blue shirts, and with the wind behind them in the second half, they had the best of the second period, despite which Celtic still threatened on occasion. Waverley reported, "Before and after the turn, the Celts had top-hole openings. Patsy Gallacher, less in the picture than he usually is, made his presence felt. The mighty Atom's head was ever in evidence. He stood on the ball for the fraction of a second, ere slipping it to right or left, or shoving it up the middle to the discomfiture of the Paisley rearguard. On a very odd occasion, he went on himself." After a brief opening flurry in the second half, when the St Mirren goalkeeper made what Waverley described as a glorious save from a Jimmy McGrory header, St Mirren began to dominate, Waverley writing, "They seemed more at home in the mud, but their finishing was no better than that of the other fellows." Even Man in the Know had to concede St Mirren's superiority in the second half, writing, "If the Celts had nearly all the first half, the Saints asserted themselves later, and round about the quarter-to-go period were relentlessly bombarding Shevlin's citadel. Corner after corner fell to the Homesters, most of them given away by Wilson, who, after beginning quite well, lapsed into sheer recklessness and did some extraordinary things. Of course, he is very young. As ball after ball came sailing over from the flag kick, the Paisley crowd shouted, 'Here it's now!' But it never came." For all St Mirren's second half dominance, the best chances still fell to Celtic. Man in the Know reported, "The Celts somehow weathered the storm and fought back towards Bradford, who brought off a couple of glorious saves from brilliant efforts by Gallacher and McGrory. Adam McLean should have won the game when Connolly, after beating all and sundry, dropped over a peach of a ball which fell at Adam's boot and simply shrieked to be netted. Close in and with the whole goal at his disposal, Adam couldn't have missed had he belted it first time. But he trapped the ball and changed his feet to make it a cert. In that moment of time, Findlay managed to get across and Adam was swept off his pins. On open scoring chances, Celts should have won by a handful, but our marksmen were weak and faulty. The best try was undoubtedly Patsy's great header, which at first appeared quite unsavable. Like a panther, Bradford sprang across from post to post and, in falling, managed to touch the ball out with his fingertips. It was one of the greatest saves I have witnessed. Also, it was hard lines on Patsy, who, along with John McFarlane, outshone all else afield. True, some of the St Mirren players, notably the defenders, may have attracted as much notice as either of the two great Celts named, but it wasn't for football playing. Neutral observers thought the draw was a fair result, and the replay was fixed for Tuesday afternoon at Celtic Park. With interest in the replay just as great as for the first match, the 1920s equivalent of the hospitality section needed a quick rearrangement. Waverley reported on the 9th of March 1925, "Mr W. Maley advises me that Tuesday's kick-off has been fixed for 3:15. All Celtic balcony ticket holders and clergymen are requested to make use of the Grant stand for the day. The balcony is being specially reserved for Celtic and St Mirren directors and SFA and league officials. The gates will be opened at 2:15. The Glasgow Observer of the 14th of March 1925 reports the attendance for the replay again approached 50,000. But the Scotsman of the 11th of March gave a more conservative estimate of 36,000, which may have been accounted for by the weather breaking down around 2 o'clock, the rain falling relentlessly for the rest of the afternoon. Celtic were unchanged from the first match, but St Mirren made one change, a loan signing from St Johnstone lining up at centre forward. After 90 goalless minutes on Saturday, Celtic, wearing green shirts, opened the scoring in the first or second minute of the replay, depending on the report, with a goal that was nothing out of the ordinary at the time, but would never have been allowed today. Man in the Know reported on the 14th of March 1925. It took the Celts just 1 minute to break the ice on Tuesday. Big Jock grabbed McGrory's header and hugged the ball as he turned to clear. But Adam McLean arrived with quite sufficient momentum to bump Bradford just at the critical moment, and the big fellow was concussed into a half swing which carried man and hugged ball over the line. Referee Dougray was standing at the post and without hesitation pointed to midfield. The St Mirren players protested furiously, but not about the barge by McLean, which was perfectly legal at the time when the goalkeeper had the ball in his hands. Their objection was that Bradford had not carried the ball into the goal. Waverley wrote in the Daily Record of the 11th of March 1925, McLean jammed the keeper against his right hand upright, and to the consternation of the Paisley buddies and the joy of the Celtic faithful, Tom Dougray signalled a goal. John Bradford is prepared to swear that the ball was never over the line. But that, by the way, the referee said it was a goal, therefore a goal it is. With an early lead secured, Celtic cruised along for the next hour without managing to add to their score. Man in the Know credited the St Mirren keeper with keeping them in the game. For about 60 minutes it was a case of Celtic v Bradford, and the big fellow won every time. I can't tell you how often he dived at McGrory's feet and saved when all seemed lost. Waverley saw the game slightly differently, suggesting St Mirren remained dangerous, if in a less polished way than Celtic. Paisley's defence was very hard to beat, and the forwards, even if in a higgledy-piggledy sort of way, were causing trouble. Howison kept forging ahead. Young Morgan's snippy runs and smart crosses were causing trouble, and Deke bringing out dangerous corners. Then, midway through the second half of the statutory 90 minutes, the equaliser. Man in the Know once again bemoaned the dearth of height and weight in the Celtic team, which was making them vulnerable at corner kicks. Now I must say that at taking corners or at repelling them, the Celts are no great shakes. The same remark applies to throw-ins. Our fellows are hopelessly small and light. From Paisley Thompson's toe the ball came sailing across and passed right over the crowd around Shevlin. I think that, like Davis's winning corner at Cardiff on Saturday, it would have curved into the net untouched. Shevlin couldn't get near it. Hilly and McFarlane were nowhere about. Tall Thompson, on loan from Perth Saints, just managed to touch it in, and the scores were level. Celtic pressed hard for the final 10 minutes of normal time, but were unable to find a winner. Waverley writes that both sides missed chances in extra time, Jimmy McGrory missing with a header when he had time to bring it down, and Thompson shooting straight at Shevlin. But for Man in the Know, it was barely worth mentioning. No need to go into details regarding the extra half hour's play. As the teams have to meet again, I will content myself with saying that in both games, the Celts' superiority in method and on play has been so marked that I have no doubt about the ultimate outcome. Besides, Shevlin, Jimmy McStay, Peter Wilson, both our Pats, McGrory and McLean took their gruelling nobly. Alec Thompson's manipulation was good, but his passing was poor and his shooting non-existent. To John McFarlane, I will say that the second replay will give him an opportunity to recover the prestige he lost on Tuesday. What on earth was wrong with him? I give it up. In the pavilion after the match, following some wrangling over the venue, the second replay was fixed for Ibrox on Monday the 16th of March with a 3:45 kick-off, the winners to play Rangers in the semi-final 5 days later. The third match of a tie which provided plenty of tension but little in the way of excitement would end, in its final moments, in bitterness and acrimony.